But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. The word of God for the people of God, and the people of God said, you may be seated. I want to give a little setup. I've got some friends that are going to be joining me up here as part of our fourth week, actually, of Faith Promise. And if you haven't been with us from the beginning on the 31st or the 30th of June, Daryl Cates started us out, and he started talking about what it meant for God to move into the neighborhood, for God to be in our lives, and how God sets the stage and the example of what it means for us to be people on mission and in mission in the world around us. And then we talked about this passage that I just read and how the mission of God in the world starts in Jerusalem, and it moves, which Jerusalem is our kind of communities, our world, the neighborhood of Edmond, if this is where you are, and moves to Judea and Samaria, which is that kind of broader context of mission. And then now, today, we're going to focus on the ends of the earth, what it means to be witnesses for the good news and of the good news to the ends of the earth. And then next week, AC is going to preach our concluding sermon for this Faith Promise series, and he's going to ask you and encourage you and challenge you to bring your faith promise, what you're going to commit above and beyond your pledge, your giving to the church, above and beyond, that God is going to provide overwhelmingly more than you need, and you're going to respond by giving that to the mission of God through the people of New Covenant. And so today, what we wanted to do is, not only were we so fortunate and blessed to have Jenny and Austin come and sing for us, and their ministry, 13 years, that's wild how long that's been. And so, but we're so thankful that they got to be here and share that song with us and their life with us that they have over these 13 years. But we've got a crew of some of my favorite people that are coming to talk about a trip they went. One of the things we do, and you should in your bulletin, there's a little insert, and in that is all of the international ways that your Faith Promise dollars are going out into the world. So take those, look at those. I'd actually encourage you to take that and pray for those people and places consistently through your week and your prayer time to lift up our missionaries around the world that we support. But one of the other things we do is we support short-term mission trips and little groups that will go and engage and connect to a community around. And one of those in the fall of 2018 was these 5 people and some other people that went to Jordan, went to Mafraq, Jordan to work with Syrian refugees, and I'm going to let them talk. But this is Catherine Horton, if you don't know her, Kendall Smith, Trey Thompson, Julie Fogarty, and Marcus Ayers. Let's show them our appreciation as we get started. So, the first question I have is for Trait. Trait has spent a bulk of his adult life working in the political realm. I was very careful not to call him a politician because that would skew all of your viewpoints of him. But he's been in the policy side of it. He works with the Capital Restoration Project right now. And so he came with, every one of them are going to come with their own kind of lens to their experience in Jordan. And Trait came with kind of that side of it, the policy, the history side of it. So Trait, I've got kind of 2 questions for you. And the first one is like, what is going on, or what has been going on in Syria and in Jordan, and why? And then the last question is, why did you decide to go to Jordan?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Trade them out, maybe. Yep, all right.
Hello, good morning. So thanks for the opportunity for us to speak today. We really appreciate the chance to talk about our experiences. I drew the short straw to talk about a little bit of the history of the civil war in Syria, so settle in for 45 minutes or so and we'll get through it. Basically, in 2010 and 2011, you had the Arab Spring, which across the Arab world and in various authoritarian countries, you had people that were rising up in protest against their governments, and they wanted to see some reforms. There were some governments that responded and tried to make some reforms and tried to do things that were a little bit better for the people. Other governments, like the Assad regime in Syria, decided to take a more hardline stand. And so they took a violent opposition to the protests. People were beaten, people were arrested, people were imprisoned. And then the protests spread throughout many cities throughout Syria and just kept, the regime kept responding more and more brutally. And so what you had in that situation was the you had defectors from the Syrian military. You had people that formed up the rebel army. And so now you have two armies fighting each other in Syria. And then what ends up happening is it becomes a proxy war. So Russia wants to flex its muscles, Iran wants to flex its muscles, the United States gets involved, other Gulf nations get involved. And so, and of course, if that wasn't enough, then you have ISIS that gets involved and starts to take over parts of western Syria and eastern Iraq. And basically what that means is you have an intense civil war going on with various factions, and there's not really a good guy or a bad guy in all of this that we would think of in traditional terms, because all of these regimes typically did not treat the common everyday people very well. And so what you end up with is over 400,000 people dead in Syria. You have currently 5.7 million registered Syrian refugees. You have 6.2 million people inside the bounds of Syria who are displaced. And it's a very terrible situation. So the countries surrounding Syria and even into Europe has seen this mass exodus of people from the country. Jordan, where we were at, has taken in over 500,000 refugees. Lebanon, 1.2 million refugees. And the stories that we heard on our trip were just harrowing. I remember talking to one family, and they told us about they packed everything in their car and they're heading for the border. And then all of a sudden they're intercepted with people with machine guns and weapons, confiscated everything that they had, and basically said, you can set off on foot. And they really could take only what they could carry into Mafraq. And so numerous stories like that, people that have escaped, they don't know the situation with their relatives, their homes have been destroyed, and just a terrible situation. And so what compelled me to go was following the situation over there, understanding that these are people that are like me, families, people who have been have kids and now they have nothing. And I think sometimes living in Edmond, we tend to get a little bit, we're not exposed to a lot of poverty, and we're not exposed to a lot of hard things like that. And I think it can make our hearts a little bit hard. And so the opportunity to get out and to meet with people, to love on people. We did partner with a church there in Mafraq, and we delivered food and aid. I remember going to a family who had no stove to cook their food. And so, just being, how much does a stove cost? About $100 American, because it's basically a propane tank and a grill, and just doing everything that we could to try and meet needs while we were there. But you look into the eyes of the children, and it breaks your heart. And having the opportunity to put names and faces to that crisis was invaluable.
So Kendall grew up in Pryor, Oklahoma, and has lived in Edmond for 27 years, and found herself leading by yourself. We sent Kendall to go and do a scouting trip, and with the hope and the heart that Kendall would come back and create more opportunities for more people to jump into the mission work of God in Jordan. How in the world did you go from Pryor to Edmond to Mafraq, Jordan? Slowly. You have to tell people in the microphone.
Slowly. Really, probably my story started in 2013, and I was in Walmart and saw a young man on 3 different aisles looking for something. And so I finally asked him if I could help him. And in that conversation, I learned that he was a Saudi Arabian student, come to our country to learn English and to go to college. And he was struggling, and he needed some help. And so we exchanged first names and phone numbers, and I said, if you need anything, call me. And so he did. And it was everything from helping him pay speeding tickets to car registrations to apartment contracts to reading prescription labels, all those things that we take for granted that are very easy. And he introduced me to Hussein, his best friend, and then they became my sons. They call me their American mom, and I helped them with their, tried to help them with their education and getting into the college universities by helping with their English. Murtada read to me every Sunday night by FaceTime, and so I could help him with pronunciation and comprehension. And Hussein came and lived with us for a while, so we could help him with essay writing and listening skills. And so this whole process made me realize how hard it is for people to be in a different country and try to navigate life. And so fast forward to 2017, Jimmy Doyle was telling me about a nonprofit that takes people to the Middle East to help them learn about the culture and also to learn, love, and serve Syrian refugees. And so I thought, my understanding from my relationship with the boys, that I knew what it was like to be displaced and what those kind of needs were. And so I went to Jordan for the first time, and the Faith Promise Dollars helped me get there. And then I came back, and John Cunningham and I co-led a team to Mafraq, and these are some of the people that went. And those experiences, when you are sitting in a home, and that's a loose term because it's a tent, it's a condemned building, it's a storage room, it's moldy, it's horrible. And you're visiting with these Syrian families, your eyes are open and your heart is broken for the situation that they're in. And so a couple of things came out of that. One is Murtada and Hussein has told me that they had never met anybody like me. And then one of the Syrian families that I visited, when we walked in, the father was sitting there and he was very, very despondent and didn't even really acknowledge that we arrived. And we had Neil Clark. He played the Middle Eastern guitar, which is an oud, and he started playing Syrian music. And the father's demeanor totally changed. He was clapping and sat by Neil and was patting him on the leg, and he was so happy. And his son walked in and looked at me and said, "I have not seen my son smile in 4 years. I mean, my father smile in 4 years." And he was videoing him, and tears were in his eyes, and he turned to me and said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "To meet you." And with a very shaky voice, he said, "Thank you for coming. We feel like people have forgotten us." And between those two things, I felt like that, Jesus calls us to be different in the world. And those, to me, were examples of possibly that I was being different and that they were noticing love in me for them. And so that's how I got to Mafraq.
Yeah, you never know when Walmart will lead you to Mafraq. So be aware, be aware. I think, just to pause, I think one of the most beautiful things about it is for Murtada and Hussein is their first example or their first experience of who Jesus was is Kendall. And that's a pretty fantastic view of who Jesus is. And so you never know when just going to help somebody read a label is going to lead you to be Jesus to somebody. So Marcus, over here on the end,
Hi, Jay.
Marcus is a counselor by trade. And so Marcus took this viewpoint of what he does here to Mafraq and to these Syrian families. And a lot of the things that Marcus has done is worked with families walking through trauma, walking through difficult moments and seasons. And so Marcus, what was that like? What was experiencing what was going on in the ends of the earth through the eyes of a counselor?
Yeah. So what, kind of, first of all, what led me to go was I do have a heart for the marginalized. I work with the marginalized here in Oklahoma, particularly those marginalized from healthcare. And in particular, I've worked with people who have been traumatized. I don't anymore. I just took a different job. I'm in it 3 weeks, but I was working with folks with trauma. And so I went for sure with that lens. The second thing that led me to go was hearing Jimmy and Kendall's story about going and knowing the enormity of that crisis, seeing images of just cities and infrastructure annihilated and realizing that those folks have no homes, and so they're leaving not by their choice, but because they have no choice but to be uprooted and to leave their country. And so the opportunity, and knowing how traumatizing that can be, the opportunity to go and to spend time with them and learn their stories, was I couldn't pass that up. So I did go with that lens. doing a little research ahead of time and then talking to the volunteers, there really isn't an infrastructure for acute trauma or other chronic kind of issues, kind of like we have today. But I was really encouraged going on the visits and going with the volunteers who go regularly to the homes of the Syrian refugees, specifically to hear their stories and hearing and sort of just feeling the impact of that. I believe it really is a tremendous service to those individuals just to have a place to tell their stories. The other thing that I think is really remarkable about this church is they've started a school. And kind of those two things sort of came together. So I made the mistake. I made the mistake of telling Igab. Igab is just this guy that just is 100%. He's with you 100%, and he's 100% in the ministry. It's really tiring to ride around with this guy because he will stop the car, get out of the car, and go into the shop and have these like conversations with people. Anyway, he's just an amazing guy. So I tell him that I'm basically just sort of asking him about like where do you go when people need like, maybe help and they have emotional troubles. He was like, oh, I got the person that we need to go visit. And so we arranged to go visit. I think it felt like the whole entire team that had joined us that evening. And so we sort of just have this little conversation in the room. There's this a young girl, about 7 or 8 years old. She has a pigmentation disease that she was born with. They were Syrian refugees as well, and so her experience, of course, was not only being a Syrian refugee in public schools and the stigma that has, but her skin disease led her to just pretty much every day having some emotional troubles, being angry, not really being able to talk to her parents about what's happening. And so eventually we go to the back room, and we're just sort of doing more of a one-on-one or with her parents kind of conversation. And she really could only identify her parents as sort of safe, supportive people. She had siblings, but siblings can be siblings, and she had really nobody that she felt like was a support. And the other part of that experience was that we had a guy from the school, John. He's sort of the local social worker, fantastic person. He's from Egypt. He works at the school. He came that evening, and between that visit and the second visit, both with John present, I really left encouraged. We were able to sort of talk through some ways to create warmth with the family and their community intentionally, and ways to help her sort of be able to talk about things and emotional management things. And John is just a tremendous resource. He was telling me, it's kind of almost a side story, that there was another similar situation, a young girl who had burns on her face more directly from a war-related event. And she was applying to go to their school and was really nervous about going to the school. And what John did was he had all of his students write her letters. And then he had letters of invitation, we can't wait to meet you. He had them all compose this song about her and for her of welcome. So her first day, she walks in, they sing this song to her, and they welcome her. And he said that she's now in middle school and public schools and doing fantastic. So I really left encouraged. There's not a real strong infrastructure in the culture, and I think that might be true for the Middle East in general, but that church is doing a tremendous job of creating space for listening and creating space for connecting with those that have been traumatized. So I'll say I had this memory as I was remembering this morning, the second visit with that family. It's a memory of Teo. It's one of my favorite memories. Teo was from Romania. He was one of the volunteers. and became really good friends with him. He's just a really, really cool guy. But the image was Teo sitting in the corner. And when you go and visit the homes, it's like almost the whole neighborhood of kids hears about it, and they all come in. And we've got this bag of toys that, that we give them. And so Teo, along with this girl, the 7 or 8 year old girl, they are just like, he's making noises, they are messing with him, they are just all having this amazing fun time in the corner, and Teo's just like, you know, I didn't see that side, never saw that side of him coming, but it was a really cool memory. So anyway.
Thank you, Marcus. So Catherine has a tremendous heart. She's on staff here and just has a tremendous heart for the marginalized, people broken, walking through those things. And so Catherine spent a lot of times reflecting on her engagement with some of the families that she spent time with. And so why don't you tell a little bit about those experiences and maybe how it has impacted you?
So on my first home visit, it was just a couple of us, and we go to this home. And our volunteer, he was an Egyptian man who has come as a long-term volunteer, and he stays here in Mothrock, and he has formed relationships with these people. The family we went to visit was just a couple, and they were probably in their early 60s, and you could tell that Amen, the volunteer, had a really good relationship with them because they were just chatting a lot. And through that conversation, he was so excited to share with me and with the other volunteer his own testimony. He had been imprisoned in Syria for 9 months without any explanation as to why. He was never told when he was arrested. He wasn't told when he was let go. And he didn't have any opportunity to talk to his family during that time. And he was saying how the cell where he was kept was so short and so narrow that he wasn't able to stand or to lay down at any time during those 9 months. And so his legs became pretty unusable by the time that he was released. And he talked about how even when he was released, it was pretty unexplainable, but these guards took him and they left him in the desert, and he didn't have use of his legs, so he felt pretty certain that he wasn't going to live. But by God, he felt really strongly that it was God who sent somebody to find him, and they took him to a hospital, and he was in a coma for a couple weeks, and he felt so sure that God had been there and helped heal him. And he was just excited. He was excited to share with us his testimony and the work that God had done in his life. And during this story, that I'm really not hearing the whole story, Amen's pretty much listening to him and translating what he wants to. It's all in Arabic. And but the man's wife, she goes and she makes us some tea, and it's in these tiny little glass cups, and she'd put pretty generous scoops of sugar, and I really liked how much sugar was in this tea, so I just drank glass after glass. There was a window open, and it started to get really cold. We were probably there for an hour and a half, and I have no idea, but she pretty much figured out I was freezing. And so without me speaking Arabic, without her speaking English, somehow she asked me if I had a jacket, and I said no. And she went behind the curtain of her room, and she came back with this scarf. And I was thankful for it, wrapped it around myself, and was pretty content to sit through the visit with it. But when we left, I folded it up, and I thanked her, and I handed it back to her. And she was adamant that she wasn't going to take it back, that she wanted me to have it because she knew I needed something. And I know how many scarves I have here in Oklahoma. It's more than I even want to admit to you all. And I knew that behind that curtain to her room, she didn't have an endless supply of scarves or blankets, or they didn't have a heater, and winter was coming soon. And so I really tried to give it back, and she just wrapped it around my shoulders and gave me a hug. And the only word I knew in Arabic at the time was shukran, which means thank you. And I just said it over, shukran, 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 because I couldn't express to her how much that meant to me. And I really could see her faith inside of that too. She saw somebody who had a need right then, and she knew she had a way to meet it, so she did. And I remember just being humbled because you go on one of these trips or you hear of people who have not much and you think that you have something to offer them. And in a very real way, she met a very basic need that I had. And she had things to give me. It helped make me realize that there isn't a power dynamic. She has exactly what I have when it comes to generosity and soul. And then I also was thinking about how good of an illustration that is for Faith Promise too, because there really are needs that are present and happening right now, and I have more than I need, and I can give in faith that when I do have a need arise, that God will be generous and abundant to meet it from somebody else too. And then I had another awesome experience with some pictures for you of this woman who she invited us to dinner. She wanted to make dinner for us, and she allowed me and Julie and our friend Megan to cook with her. She invited us to her home early, and she taught us how to boil the chicken and cut the vegetables and fry them and fry the peanuts. And so we got to make makluba, which means upside down rice, and it's delicious. And it was just another example of the hospitality of these people who are displaced. I think it's really easy to think of, I don't know, of ourselves of having a lot and them having a little, but I didn't see that at all. It was very much them giving me things I could not give them.
That's great. So Julie, what pushed you to get out of your routine, out of what's normal? What pushed you to say yes and go forward to go and visit Mafrock?
I blame you.
Yeah.
I was one of the last ones to sign up for this trip, and I signed up about this time last year because of him. He gave a Faith Promise sermon, and I felt like I had no other choice. One of the things that he said that still very much I can hear in my head is, you have a call on your life to do something. And this ended up being my something. I work here at the foundation, and I do local missions here. And Kendall works with me and had been trying to talk to me into going to Jordan. But as far as I was concerned, I had no business going to Jordan. I'm just a mom and a wife and an employee here, and I had my stuff here, and I came up with lots of excuses, one being a mom of a very active 13-year-old boy who is very active in soccer, and so there's always something, and that was my excuse. But I went, and being a wife and a mother ultimately was all I needed to be there. There was a mom there that broke my heart because she came with her 4 children. She was a mother of 6, and her oldest son died in a bombing in their city. And a few days later, when her now oldest son went to search for his body, the city was bombed again, and he died. And so she took her 4 children, 4 remaining children, and everything she could and ran. And as a mom, I couldn't blame her. I would run too, and she ran to Mafrock, Jordan, and she was there, and I was able to connect with her as a mom and just have that moment of, as a mom, my mom heart hurts for you, and to have that compassion, and she felt like somebody understood her. And I think that was really powerful for both of us. And then there was another woman there. Her husband had to go to Saudi Arabia to get work, and my husband often travels for work and is gone very frequently, and so her and I were able to kind of connect in that way of knowing what that's like and to be that mom and to learn to work outside of that. And I said in first service, it's kind of the cliche of God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And so being a mom and a wife was all I needed to go.
Thank you. Let's show our appreciation to our panel here. So I have just a few ways to respond. Yeah, you can do whatever you'd like to do. It's fine. A few ways to respond is, number one is we've been harping on this word of witness. And I think there's two ways that this crew of people is witnessing. Number one is every experience that the people in Moffrock had with these 5 white folk in Jordan and the church is an experience they are getting of Jesus, of seeing and knowing who Jesus is in their life by seeing and knowing these people and being known and seen by these people. So that's part of it. I think the other thing is the witness that they share for you and me and for the church at large, that we are called and challenged to go to the ends of the earth. And so here is my challenge to you, is they have many more hours of stories and many more hours of their experience than we would have time to put together on a Sunday morning. And so if you have a Sunday school or a group or a house church or a Rotary Club or something that you're connected in and you were compelled or pushed or moved by their story and you want to hear more, I just ask that you would say yes to that. That you would look out for them, find them, they'll be hanging around, find them and have them come and share their heart. Even just take them to lunch. Just don't be a weirdo with that. And then the last thing is this, is that God is calling all of us to engage the world around us, starting in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and going to the ends of the earth, powered by the Holy Spirit to go and be his witnesses. And so be thinking about what God is calling you to do and be as we respond.